What's the best rock and roll book that came out in 2025? How about the best documentary? Or how about the best book about a band? Or how about the best documentary about a band member? Well, welcome to the third annual Rock Talk Studio Award Show. Here comes the best of the best rock and roll books, the best rock and roll documentaries of 2025. Welcome into one of my favorite shows of the year that I get to do. A show that probably is the hardest show to do, to try to rank and come up with the best rock and roll books and the best rock and roll documentaries of the year. This year, there was a lot of really great, strong material, definitely favoring more towards rock and roll books. I think rock and roll documentaries were a little light this year, but the rock and roll books were really off the chart. There were so many great releases. We're going to get into all that today. So let's start the award show with the best rock and roll books of 2025. And I'm going to start with the best book about a band, because this award was the one that surprised me the most. This book surprised me the most. I didn't think this type of a book could pack this type of a story and this type of effect. It is kind of like a coffee table style book. And it is the winner of the best book about a band, and that is a book called Teenage Wasteland, Who at Winterland, 1968 and 76. This book takes 500 photos, and a lot of photos are from people who actually went to the show, and they used a whole reel. So it's not just your typical glamour shots of the Who during these concerts. There's blurry pictures that were included. There's pictures from kind of a side or a strange angle. But when put together and combined with the author's writing, and this book was written by Edoardo Genzolini, who did a great job, this book packs so much information about what the Who was like in 1968 and then what they became in 1976. I'm very surprised that this book won this award, but it is very deserving and very cool to check out, both visually and the way it is written and the angles that it's covered. Teenage Wasteland, The Who at Winterland, 68 and 76, the winner of this year's best book about a band. Let's take a look at the best book about a band member. And if the Who book was sneaky, this one is an underdog indeed, because there's a lot of great books that came out this year about band members. There's a great book about Brian Wilson, The Rise, Fall, and Resurrection of Brian Wilson. I mean, Ozzy Osbourne's memoir is a book about a band member. Mike Campbell's Heartbreaker is a book about a memoir. But this book is so unique, I'm giving it the award, and that is Peter Wolf's book, Waiting on the Moon, Artists, Poets, Drifters, Grifters, and Goddesses. Peter Wolf is the ex-lead singer of the Jay Giles Band, and he has written a book not really just about himself, but about the people that he admired and that he hung out with and that he lived with and that he worked with throughout the years. And here's where this book is different. This list of people is not your typical, rock icons. It's not Mick Jagger and Keith Richards and Dylan and Pete Townsend and Neil Young. They're in there here and there. But what makes his book so different is he's talking about his experiences with Alfred Hitchcock. He's talking about living with David Lynch. He was his roommate. He's talking about an experience with Aretha Franklin, Andy Warhol, Nelson Rockwell, Julia Childs. It's crazy. Jack Nicholson. He was married to Faye Dunaway for years. There's a lot of really great stories, very unique, different opinions about a great life in the world of rock and roll. This is a cool book. Check it out. Waiting on the Moon by Peter Wolf. That gets the best book about a band member in 2025. So if we're doing best books about bands and band members, there's got to be the best book not about a band or a band member. And that award goes to a book that came out right here towards the end of the year, one of the best books of the year, and that is Cameron Crowe's memoir called The Uncool, where Cameron Crowe basically walks you through how he was able to interview David Bowie, Jimmy Page, Greg Allman, Dickie Betts, Jim Croce, Jackson Browne, Glenn Frey, all the big artists of the early 70s into the 80s at the age of 15. This book, if you love the movie Almost Famous, this book is kind of the behind the scenes story of Almost Famous and how that movie really was the story of Cameron Crowe's life. Not only do you get all the great rock and roll stories, but then when he puts kind of the rock and roll pen down at 21, when he claims he was washed up in the world of rock and roll, He goes and writes Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Say Anything, and of course, Almost Famous. And then he goes on to write Jerry Maguire. I mean, his list of credits as a movie maker are almost as impressive as his times with the rock and rollers. But the rock and roll stories in this one are mind-blowing. These stories cannot be told by anyone but Cameron Crowe, and they are amazing. Great book called The Uncool, and definitely deserving of the award of the best book not about a band or a band member. Okay, it's time to look at some documentaries. And then, of course, the best book of the year is coming up and the best documentary of the year is coming up. But let's take a quick break and we'll do some best documentaries that come out, the award winners for 2025. All right, before we get into the best documentaries of 2025, I just want to talk to you quickly about something I put together last year. I wanted to do something that extended this show, something that gives you more information, something that you can use as a reference, because people are always asking me about, what's a good rock and roll book or a documentary, what's coming out. So I created a newsletter. I call it the Rock Talk Studio Blast. It comes out on the last Friday of each month. A lot of you have signed up, and I just want to say thank you for that. And just a big thank you overall to everybody who supports what I do with the Rock Talk Studio show, the podcast, and talking to me on my social media channels. Just the engagement that I get from everybody about rock and roll books and docs is what fuels me, what keeps me going, and why I continue to do this. I also have to admit I am a little obsessed with rock and roll books and docs. I love them, and I watch them and read them and spend a lot of time with them. But without this type of outlet and without the people who support me, I don't know if I would still be doing this. 2026 is going to be the beginning of the 4th year of the Rock Talk Studio, and that is just mind-blowing to think that it's gone on this long and it's been this well received. So getting back to the newsletter, if you want the newsletter, it's free, and there's a little subscription button in the show notes, but it's going to give you all the new releases that are coming out this year. I list all the dates, so you're going to see what's coming. We're going to talk about all the news, all the new things that are reported. I have a top 5 that I do every year, and I also just put out a holiday shopping guide, so if you're looking for holiday tips on what books and docs to get, there's a lot of great information there. I wanted to pass that along to everybody. And again, I wanted to extend a thank you to everybody who is supporting that, who is enjoying it, and who's talking to me about it. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much, everybody. All right, let's take a look at the best rock and roll documentaries of 2025. Let's jump right into the best documentaries of 2025 with the easiest, most hands-down, slam dunk award winner of all these awards, and that's Best Documentary About a Band. This documentary was in the works for a long time, and when it was announced, it was probably the most anticipated documentary announced of the year, and that's Becoming Led Zeppelin, the monster triumph that included the 3 remaining living legends, Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, and John Paul Jones, and their contribution to this really was what made it so special, along with some hidden found tapes of John Bonham. There's a lot of great concert footage in here. Just really get a sense of what it was like to see Led Zeppelin when they first came out. I remember there's a shot of a concert where there's these young kids in the crowd, and they were just mind blown. They just were covering their ears, and they didn't really get it. And it was just like, what is going on? Led Zeppelin and all their power and all their glory were just this young, unproven force in rock and roll. The documentary is all about the beginning of the band and the first 2 records, so it's not a total career retrospective, but just those first 2 years are such a powerhouse and such an amazing story. It makes you want more, but it is a great documentary and deserving of the award for 2025 Best Documentary About a Band. What about the best documentary about a band member? Because this one is pretty interesting. There were a couple of runner-ups, and it took me a while to figure this one out, but I'm going to give it to the 5-hour documentary. And no, it's not a Beatles documentary. The 5-hour documentary about Billy Joel, and it's called And So It Goes. And this documentary, which is narrated by Billy Joel, takes a really interesting look at who this guy is and where he came from and how he became this huge draw as a songwriter. Bruce Springsteen's in here, Jackson Browne's in here. A lot of people are talking about Billy Joel and his songwriting and his melodies and are bowing down to his talent. When you take a look at Billy Joel's whole career, you get to see how many great songs this guy wrote. And the contributions from his wives in this are amazing. His first wife basically put him on the map and worked so hard to get his career what it was. And it really shows you how he handled all that. And a lot of it is not so pretty. And a lot of it is about him admitting and looking at where he went wrong and how he could have been better as a person and as a father and as a husband. It was really well done, and I enjoyed it. 5 hours was a little long, but in the end, it definitely was worth the award for the best documentary about a band member in 2025. Check this one out, And So It Goes, the Billy Joel story. All right, I did a best award for the best book, not about a band or not about a band member, and I like this next doc that I'm going to give that a same award to. So the best documentary, not about a band or not about a band member, goes to Norm's Rare Guitars. This documentary came out early in the year and sat on my top 5 list the whole year, never left, because it is such a great story about Norm Harris, the owner of Norm's Rare Guitars in California, this little guitar shop that he opened up and started selling rare guitars, and his customer base started growing, and it was made up of famous rock and roll stars. One of the first people who bought a guitar from Norm was George Harrison, and that just lit the fuse. Next up comes Tom Petty and Bob Dylan, and Joe Bonamassa became a big part of the story. People would just come to Norm's to hang out and play guitar. Slash. I mean, the list of people who contribute to this documentary is fantastic, but it's really more a personal story about Norm and this guy and his wife and how they were able to do this and how they were able to still do this, and then how they were able to launch people's career. Marcus King comes to mind. It played a big part of Marcus King's career, going to Norm's and playing because they started a YouTube channel. What a great documentary. I love this documentary. I recommend this thing all over the place. Easy winner for the best documentary, not about a band or band member. Norm's Rare Guitars. Great doc. There's only 2 left now as I wrap up this year and give away the awards for 2025. So we've got the best documentary and the best book coming up next. Before I give out the big awards, I wanted to just mention that I've been doing the award show for 3 years now. This is the 3rd year. So go back and check in the archives to the other award winners. There are a lot of great books and docs, and I wanted to mention to you the archives are free. So you've got almost close to 100 shows now that are in the archives. You can go back and see who won the best book last year, the best documentary in the first year. I'll give you a hint. It was a great Little Richard documentary that not many people know about, but it's really, really good. All those great books and docs, all those old award shows are in the archives, so you can go dig back and take a look at it. All right, let's do the best documentary of 2025. Without a doubt, the most controversial award that I'm giving away today, and it has brought up the most conversations on my socials about this being better than Becoming Led Zeppelin. And it was a really hard choice for me to make, but this documentary set itself apart because it's about an individual who just really bared his soul. And it goes to Bono's documentary, Stories of Surrender, which is his kind of one-man play show that he did around his memoir called Surrender. And it is done really, really well. Bono comes out and is just really lays his life on the line and kind of acts through his life and talks heavily about his relationship with his wife, his band members, and then his father, which is really, really touching. He sings parts of songs with a 3-piece band that he put together. So the band, the U2's not there. It's just a different side of Bono, but you also have, Bono with his ego and his delivery, but his connection and the way that he tells his story was really moving. And that's the part that I liked about this documentary. Becoming Led Zeppelin was powerful. It was great. But this one was more emotionally engaging, and it really moved me to the point of giving it the best documentary of 2025, Bono, Stories of Surrender. That leaves us just the book. I don't think there is any controversy around this book. I think this book is on a lot of people's best book of the year award because it really deserves it. When this book came out, it immediately went to number 1 on my top 5 list, and it hung out there all year long. And that's Heartbreaker, the memoir of Mike Campbell that he wrote with Ari Serdoval, a passionate, humble, very telling story of Mike Campbell and his relationship with Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. What this book does is give the other side of the Tom Petty story. There's a lot of great Tom Petty books out there, but none of them have this insight from Mike's side of the story, from Mike's view, and what it was like being the partner to Tom Petty, being almost a brother to Tom Petty, growing up with him, meeting him in his teens, and spending basically the rest of his life with him until Tom passed. Mike's a great guy, and it comes through in this book, and it is written so well. Every page was fascinating. There's a lot of depth to this book, a lot of story, and a very open, honest delivery from Mike Campbell. My favorite book of the year, the best book of 2025, Heartbreaker by Mike Campbell and Ari Serdoval. Well, that wraps up the best books and docs for 2025. When I kick off the fourth year of the Rock Talk Studio, January, the first week of January, that will be the top 10 rock and roll book show and then the top 10 rock and roll documentaries. So if you want more of the best of 2025, I'm going to do 2 shows in 1 week that do top 10 books and then top 10 documentaries. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and thanks for another great year at the Rock Talk Studio. 2025's best books, best docs, 2025, one of the best years of the Rock Talk Studio, and I can't thank you all enough for being along for the ride. All right, let's tear it down one last time. Pack it up and head on down the road. I'll catch you next year in the Rock Talk Studio.